On February 18, 2019, a surprise press conference was called in London by 7 British members of Parliament. 7 members of Parliament who were about to announce their resignation from the Labour Party. These MPs revealed that they would now sit in Parliament as a group of independents, initially to be called simply the Independent Group, and the news rocked the UK political establishment. Overnight, an 8th Labour MP joined them, and the next day, media speculation went into overdrive as 3 Conservative MPs left their party to join the new independent group as well. On February 28th, just 10 days later, a YouGov voter intention poll showed that 18% of voters were already planning to vote for the independent group at the next election, an astonishingly high number for such a new party, and just 5 points behind Labour and halfway to catching the ruling Conservative Party. Was a new centrist party, which would transcend tribal party affiliations, about to emerge into British politics? For a brief moment, Britain appeared to be on the brink of a political revolution. And then, within a matter of weeks, it all fell apart. Big time. Before 2019 was over, this new group, which would later rename itself Change UK, and then rename itself again to the Independent Group for Change, had disbanded, and all 11 of the breakaway MPs who had joined it were out of politics. Instead of ending politics as usual, this erstwhile revolution only managed to end 11 political careers. Where did it all go so wrong? Hi, I'm Fredo Rockwell, and welcome to another edition of Strange Politics. Before I go any further, I should declare my own interest in this story. Although I'm an American, I live in the UK, and I am a member of the Liberal Democrats, a party which comes up several times in this story. I think I've managed to be pretty objective, but if you don't agree, at least you now understand where my bias comes from. If you think I am unfair at any point, just let me know in the comments. But do this right after you like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell. Now then, when it comes to the independent group, Change UK, the Independent Group for Change. Okay, before we go any further, we have to address the really serious branding issue this group had. At that first press conference, it was called simply the Independent Group, which the press quickly shortened to TIG, and which in turn led to the group being called TIG. And within a few days, the TIG MPs were being called Tiggers. But before Disney's lawyers could even get a cease and desist letter in the post, the new party renamed itself to Change UK, the Independent Group. A few weeks later, it changed its name again to the equally terrible and equally bland the Independent Group for Change. To avoid confusion, I'm going to refer to them from this point simply as Change UK, which is probably how the party is best remembered today, when it is remembered at all. I want to list the reasons I believe Change UK fell apart, but first, let's examine exactly just why this new group, if only for a moment, appeared set to upend the established order of politics in the UK. February 2019 was an especially feverish time in British politics. Both major parties, the governing Conservatives and the opposition Labour Party, were deeply divided over Brexit. In theory, Brexit had been decided by the 2016 EU referendum, when 52% of voters voted to leave and 48% of voters voted to remain. But in practice, 2.5 years later, politics in Britain was a total mess. Each party contained multiple factions which were in open revolt against their respective leaders and against each other. On February 14th, just 4 days before Change UK's press conference launch, Prime Minister Theresa May suffered a massively embarrassing defeat, the biggest for a sitting Prime Minister in history, when her plan for Brexit was voted down 303 to 258. In normal times, any Prime Minister who loses a critical vote by any margin would almost certainly resign, or at least call an election. But these were far from normal times. There was a growing sense among parliamentarians and much of the public that British politics was broken. With both Labour and the Conservatives backing Brexit, but 48% of the country still hoping that the UK could somehow remain in the EU, much of the public felt marginalised. There appeared to be space in the political landscape for a new, pragmatic, centrist, pro-European party. And it also appeared that there were plenty of MPs who might be tempted to join such a group. Speculation and rumors about a new party along these lines being formed appeared in the press almost daily. Of course, There already was a long-established centrist pro-European party in British politics, the Liberal Democrats. But the Lib Dems, as they are known, were in a terrible state and had yet to recover from the 2015 election, when the party was reduced from 57 seats in Parliament to just 9. The Lib Dems were also deeply distrusted by Labour after their coalition with the Conservatives between 2010 and 2015, and the Conservatives weren't very happy with the Lib Dems either, as during the coalition government the Lib Dems prevented them from adopting some of their most cherished and most extreme policies. Not for the first time, or for the last time, political observers were predicting the imminent collapse of the Liberal Democrats, and some Lib Dems were openly calling for the party to merge with any new centrist party if one ever appeared. So it was in this context, with the entire British political establishment anticipating a new centrist party to emerge, and a lot of people desperately hoping that one would, that Change UK first appeared. For a brief moment, the new group captured the public imagination. Within 24 hours, an 8th Labour MP and 3 pro-European Conservative MPs joined the group as well, further establishing Change UK's claim to be a truly independent, centrist political force. Everything seemed to be coming together, and rumours of mass defections from both major parties, but especially from the Labour Party, began to circulate. But like I said, the whole effort pretty much collapsed within a few weeks, and by June of 2019, most of Change UK's MPs had quit the new party. What was left of the party after that was pretty much an irrelevance. There are a lot of possible reasons you might cite for this spectacular failure, and many of them stem from that initial group of Labour MPs being totally unprepared for the difficult task of setting up a new political party in the middle of the UK's biggest political crisis in decades. But here are the reasons I think the independent group / Change UK / the Independent Group for Change failed. At the press conference on the 18th of February, each of the 7 former Labour MPs spoke at the lectern one by one. It was pretty moving stuff, especially when a heavily pregnant Luciana Berger explained how she had been subject to anti-Semitic attacks from within the Labour Party for years. But the first 6 MPs to speak, including Berger, spoke almost exclusively about their reasons for leaving the Labour Party. Even these varied widely, from Jeremy Corbyn's leadership style to the aforementioned problems with anti-Semitism. Only the last speaker, Chuka Umunna, spoke about the purpose of the new group itself. He was also the only one to directly address voters and ask for their support. But Umunna, while clearly the most charismatic politician in the new group, failed to explain what Change UK actually stood for. He claimed that British politics was broken and called for other politicians to leave their parties and help this new group of MPs forge a new political consensus. But he failed to outline what he thought that consensus should be, other than vague platitudes about creating a fairer, more just society. After the press conference, Change UK did release a founding statement on its website. This listed 11 values, but they were all extremely bland, like cherishing the rule of law, and included no specifics whatsoever. And anyway, because these were not explained during the press conference, which was a massive media event and the perfect opportunity to introduce new ideas to the country, very few people noticed these values or were even aware that they ever existed. When Change UK was joined by 3 members of the Conservative Party, they again framed their decision to join by pointing out the flaws in their previous party. All in all, Change UK was presenting itself more as a therapy group for defecting MPs rather than a potential government in waiting. The new group did have one clearly understood position, one which was surprisingly left out of its 11 values. Each founding member was pro-Europe and supported a second referendum on membership, what was regularly called at the time the People's Vote. But any other position that Change UK had was kept pretty vague. In a post-mortem article about Change UK published in The Guardian in April of 2020, Gavin Shuker explains that Change UK had hoped to form gradually over 3 trimesters. The first trimester was the time before the public reveal, when potential defectors had secret discussions about forming a new party. They hoped that a formal party structure and party leader could wait to be chosen until the 3rd trimester, hopefully after Change UK's first party conference in the autumn. That left a critical 6 months or so, the 2nd trimester, when the new group would have no real leader, no defined policies, and no clear internal structure. I think being so intentionally vague was an effort to remain an attractive option for MPs who were unhappy with Labour or the Conservatives. Once Change UK took firm positions on anything, it was bound to alienate some potential members. But I also think this was a major miscalculation and was based on a misunderstanding of the importance of MPs to British political parties. It was as if Change UK thought that if enough MPs joined it, a complete, fully functional party apparatus would magically appear. In fact, what it needed most of all was a broad membership base and some experienced party administrators. But we will come back to that. In the meantime, with no leader, Shukar was appointed as convener, whatever that is, and Amuna was appointed as spokesperson. None of the MPs which formed Change UK were household names, what are sometimes referred to as big beasts in British politics, but Amuna was clearly the potential star in the bunch. To the public and the media, he seemed like the obvious choice for leader. And in fact, Anna Soubry, who had left the Conservatives to join Change UK, did so with the understanding that Amuna would in fact be the leader. But in the early days, there were still hopes of mass defections of MPs, especially from the Labour Party, and many potential defectors expressed reluctance to join a party under Amuna's leadership. Basically, they were worried Change UK might be his personal vanity project. Partly to avoid this impression, and partly because other Change UK MPs had their eye on the top spot themselves, Amuna regularly pushed aside any suggestion that he become leader. Instead, Change UK touted their, quote, flat leadership structure as a selling point. While this might have been a potential selling point to MPs who wanted to escape Jeremy Corbyn's heavy-handed leadership of the Labour Party, this flat structure was in fact a violation of UK electoral law. Oops. It might seem odd to say that a party formed by 11 elected members of Parliament lacked experience, but it became clear within a few weeks of operation that Change UK was struggling with the basics of forming a party. Most notably, the UK Electoral Commission requires any new party to have a designated leader in order to compete in an election. Change UK wanted to take part in the European parliamentary elections in May, so they had to follow the Electoral Commission rules and appoint someone. Instead of appointing Amuna, or one of the other MPs who may have wanted the job, former Conservative MP Heidi Allen was appointed interim leader as a compromise, until the party could vote on a permanent leader at their hoped-for autumn conference. It was at this point, the party's registration with the Electoral Commission, that the first name change took place. While the name The Independent Group was bland, it was at least reasonably well known, thanks to the massive publicity which had surrounded the party's launch. But the name was left behind for something equally bland but even less meaningful, Change UK, The Independent Group. The press release issued at the time doesn't explain the reason behind the change, but according to Change UK MP Mike Gapes, the original name was rejected by the Electoral Commission for being misleading. The Electoral Commission also rejected the party's proposed logo, a black box with the initials TIG, the initials of their former name, the Independent Group, with #change written below. The hashtag appears to have been considered a link to online material, which is not allowed. So the newly renamed Change UK ended up with this for a logo. And I'm sorry, this is just the worst logo I think I've ever seen in my life. I mean, what are those lines? It looks like something from like a prison uniform from 100 years ago, and the font, like Change UK is supposed to be the main name, but in the Independent Group is just as big. I mean, it's just a mess. I don't even know what to say. It's just the worst. And when this logo was applied to an official campaign bus, an important fixture in all British election campaigns, it looked like this. And I'm sorry, this bus just makes me laugh. I mean, it's so bad. I mean, first of all, this bus could go right past you 100 times without you even realizing there was anything interesting written on it. It doesn't have any color. I mean, there's that flag in the corner, but there's barely anything. And it's just, ugh. Anyway, I'm not the only one that thought this, you'll see. Many journalists said that the bus looked like it had been designed using Microsoft Word, and, they were right. These were all very basic, very avoidable mistakes that experienced campaigners should have avoided. The problem was that the Change UK MPs were not experienced campaigners, not in any meaningful sense, really. All but one came from either safe or very safe seats in their previous parties. Interim leader Heidi Allen, for example, had only been elected to what is one of the safest Conservative seats in the country. This means hardly any Change UK MPs had fought a hard-fought election in ages, if ever. Anne Coffey, for example, had not faced a serious opponent for her seat in Stockport since 1992, and at the most recent election in 2017, she received a massive 63% of the vote. Hardly anyone in Change UK had any experience in the rough and tumble of a hard-fought election, and it showed. Change UK was, at its heart, an appeal for finding pragmatic solutions to make the UK a better society. This is an appealing idea, but also a very fuzzy one. Pragmatism isn't an ideology. It's really the lack of an ideology. It just means being practical and adopting whatever policy or idea seems like it will work best at the time for any given situation. Change UK tried to portray its lack of any defined ideology as a positive. The country was still bitterly divided following the 2016 EU membership referendum, and occupying the pragmatic center seemed like a plausible position to take. The idea certainly polled well among voters. But not having any clear ideology or positions makes it very hard to attract something every new party badly needs: activists. MPs may be the most prominent members of any political party, but it is the grassroots activist base which does most of the essential work. Most activists, by definition, tend to be very dedicated to their cause, whatever it is. Why else would these people be willing to hold up giant orange signs in a raging gale? And while many activists might be willing to dedicate their lives to advancing socialism or rolling back the state, far fewer are willing to die on the Hill in the name of whatever seems reasonable. An even more important, but often unrecognized role activists play in smaller parties is standing as candidates in elections, especially in seats where a party has little chance of winning. Like most parliamentary democracies, Britain doesn't hold genuinely national elections. Each general election is in fact 650 individual, separate elections to elect a local MP, and these MPs in turn decide who gets to be Prime Minister and form a government. When the Eurosceptic Referendum Party stood in the 1997 election, it could claim to be a nationally relevant party, even though no one expected it to win power because it stood a candidate in nearly every constituency. This meant nearly everyone in the UK had an opportunity to at least vote for a referendum party candidate if they wanted to. Small parties which only run candidates in a handful of constituencies, on the other hand, are generally ignored in the national media narrative. 11 MPs was a great beginning for Change UK, but if they wanted to compete as a national party, they would need to find hundreds more people dedicated enough to this new, fuzzily defined party who were willing to stand as candidates and probably lose very badly. Finding hundreds of suitable candidates is difficult for any party, but when new parties try to do this quickly, without a deep grassroots support base full of well-known, long-term members to recruit from, they tend to accidentally nominate a few cranks and closet racists. And as sure as night follows day, the media eventually spots these guys. Just keep watching for a great example. By far the biggest strategic error made by Change UK in its entire history was the decision not to contest the UK's local elections, which were held on May 2, 2019. Local elections in the UK are technically just about local issues, but in reality they are part of the national political narrative. This is because thousands of council seats up and down the country are up for election on a single day. In 2019, there were 8,886 of them up for grabs, and voters regularly use this opportunity to express their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with whoever is in power nationally. When the party in power does badly in the locals, which is pretty common, this is typically interpreted as a defeat for the Prime Minister of the day. Fielding candidates in even a fraction of the thousands of council seats up for election in 2019 would have been a mammoth task for Change UK, and to be fair, it was always going to be pretty much impossible for a party which was only 10 weeks old. But, fair or not, sitting out the locals basically killed off any chance Change UK had to become a national force. In the contentious atmosphere of the spring of 2019, the local elections were treated by many voters as a second Brexit referendum. That might sound a bit odd if you're not used to British politics, but trust me, that's the way everyone talked about it. 48% of the country had voted to remain in the EU in 2016, and both Labour and the Conservatives were still officially pursuing a Brexit agenda. If voters from that 48% who voted Remain wanted to express their frustration with the major parties, and a lot of them did, there was only one main pro-Remain party on the ballot: the Liberal Democrats. Everyone expected the Conservatives to do badly in the locals. The governing party typically does, but they still did much worse than anyone expected, losing 1,330 seats. Labour was expected to make at least some gains, but instead they also lost seats, 84 of them. 84 seats is not a big loss, but it is extremely rare for an official opposition to lose seats in a local election. This was a hugely embarrassing result for Labour. Meanwhile, Britain's centrist third party, which everyone had written off as headed for extinction only weeks previously, gained 706 seats. The Liberal Democrats had their best local election result in over a generation. Speaking as a Lib Dem myself, I can confirm that these results were a massive shot in the arm for everyone in the party. For 3 months, ever since that initial Change UK press conference in February, Lib Dems like me across the country had been worried that their party was about to disappear, or maybe be absorbed into Change UK, and that wasn't a nice feeling. Now, with a massive win, the Lib Dems were positioned as Britain's primary pro-Remain party. And with no Change UK results from the local elections for the media to talk about at all, Change UK was completely absent from the national political narrative for over a week, at an extremely critical moment in its history. Change UK never regained its position as the upstart, pragmatic, pro-Remain party. The Lib Dem surge in renewed popularity simply grew too quickly. In a YouGov poll taken a week after the local election results, Change UK had fallen from 18% support in February to just 2%. And there was no coming back from that. Back in February, when Change UK launched, Britain was not expecting to take part in the 2019 EU Parliament elections, which were scheduled for May. Britain was officially scheduled to leave the EU on the 29th of March, nearly 2 months before these elections were to take place. But to no one's real surprise, the deadline for leaving the EU was postponed, and even though this was kinda expected, everyone in the UK political establishment seemed shocked to learn that, as Britain would still be in the EU at the time of the elections, it was therefore legally obliged to take part in them. The Conservative-led British government tried to get out of this, but ultimately there were no legal means of avoiding the election, and it had to take place on May 23rd. If most British voters saw the local elections as a chance to express their views about Europe, you can be sure everyone saw the European parliamentary elections that way, even more so. Fresh off their recent triumph in the locals a few weeks previously, the Lib Dems were flying high and were definitely the main party for Remainers to vote for going into the European elections. But, concerned about splitting the pro-Remain vote, Lib Dem leader Vince Cable nevertheless offered to enter into a pro-Remain electoral pact with Change UK and the Green Party. Both declined. Appearing on the BBC programme Newsnight, Chuka Umunna rejected the idea that the pro-Remain vote might be split. And he also rejected the idea that Change UK should ever form an alliance with any other party. Change UK forged ahead on its own, and their EU election campaign launch seemed to go reasonably well. The party was putting up a full slate of candidates, and several of them were well known, including BBC News presenter Gavin Esler, and Rachel Johnson, the sister of the prominent Conservative politician and current Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But even finding 70 candidates who were above suspicion and loyal to their new party proved too difficult for Change UK. For example, days before the election, Rachel Johnson, their most prominent candidate, publicly regretted her decision to join Change UK. She described her move as the rat jumping onto a sinking ship. She also said that Change UK itself was a terrible name. True. And that the party focus group every decision and had 11 leaders, not one. Ouch. And remember how I said that small parties struggle to get a list of candidates together without at least one of them being revealed in the media to be a closet racist? Well, that happened too. Only one day after Change UK's campaign launch, its lead candidate in Scotland was forced to step down after a journalist found a 2012 tweet which said, "Black women scare me." Sorry, I'm laughing just because this is just so awful. I mean, it's awful, the sentiment in the tweet, but just the idea that someone would run for office with this in the Twitter feed is insane. Okay, I'm going to start again. Black women scare me. I put this down to being chased through Amsterdam by a crazy black. That's wrong on, I mean, I don't even know how many levels, but the idea that you would think after tweeting this, hey, I'm going to run for public office. Who does that? Anyway. A week before the election, another Scottish Change UK candidate quit the race. This one wasn't a closet racist, though. Saying he thought it would be wrong for voters to split the pro-Remain vote, David MacDonald formally withdrew his candidacy and endorsed the Liberal Democrats. And then, just a few days later on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, perhaps the most influential media platform in British politics, Change UK's interim leader Heidi Allen speculated that Change UK might not even exist in a year's time, and even if it did, she said she might not stay in the party. She was right, of course. Change UK didn't even make it to the end of 2019, but this was a heck of a thing to say about the party she led on an influential news programme 3 days before a crucial election. And if Heidi Allen didn't have faith that Change UK was going to stick around, frankly, why should anyone else? Allen's admission was a telling sign. Even before polling stations opened for the European elections, Change UK was a spent force. When the results came in, the party had managed a mere 3.3% of the vote and failed to gain a single one of the 60 seats up for election. Meanwhile, the Liberal Democrats came in an astounding second place, its best finish in a national election in, well, like 100 years, forever. Depends on how you define the party. But yeah, it was big. Change UK's result was a disaster. But even more disastrous vote was how little anyone cared. It went largely unnoticed in the media, partly because there were too many really important issues to talk about, like the absolutely shocking result for the Conservatives, 5th place, which led to the resignation of Prime Minister Theresa May as party leader the next day. As a meaningful political force on the national stage, Change UK was finished. From the beginning, Change UK seemed much more like an internal squabble within the Labour Party than a genuine attempt to forge a new political identity. This is just my opinion, but I would argue that Labour has the strongest, most tribal party identity in British politics, and this is evidenced by the fact that the 7 MPs who formed Change UK spent almost all of their valuable speaking time at that initial press conference explaining their anguished decisions to leave Labour. This was not the first time that a group of more moderate MPs had left the Labour Party. In January 1981, 4 MPs broke with Labour to form the Social Democratic Party, or SDP, which was later joined by an additional 24 Labour defectors. Like Change UK, the SDP captured the public imagination and did well in polls, with over 50% support in one poll a few months after its formation. Unlike Change UK, the SDP quickly formed an alliance with the Liberal Party and later merged with it to form the modern-day Liberal Democrats. Rightly or wrongly, most Labour Party members credit that split with Labour's inability to win an election for another 16 years. The memory was still deeply ingrained in the minds of party leaders in 2019, and they were not about to let an SDP-style revolt happen again. Well, actually that's not true. One leader was not about to let an SDP-style revolt happen again, Tom Watson, Labour's then deputy leader. He appeared on the BBC Sunday Politics programme, The Andrew Marr Show, after Change UK's launch to address what he called a crisis for the soul of the Labour Party. He called on party leader Jeremy Corbyn to, quote, get a grip, to start taking the party's huge problem with anti-Semitism seriously, and to back a second EU referendum. He argued that besides being the right things to do, these steps were needed to keep more MPs from jumping ship to Change UK. Corbyn mostly ignored Watson's pleas. These two never really got along. So Watson set up his own new centre-left group within Labour, called the Future Britain Group, to try and keep the many unhappy centrist Labour MPs on board. Watson's efforts seemed to have worked, or at least there were no mass defections the way Change UK had hoped. But in my opinion, the thing which probably stopped additional Labour MPs from joining Change UK was the addition of the 3 former Conservative Party members. Many Labour MPs were unhappy with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, but I suspect very few were willing to get into bed with former Tories, however moderate. Like I said, party identity runs very deep in Labour circles. Following the EU Parliament election disaster, Change UK quickly fell apart. At a meeting held on June 4th, 6 of the 11 Change UK MPs resigned from the party, including Chuka Umunna, Luciana Berger, and interim leader Heidi Allen. These 3, along with Change UK MP Angela Smith, later joined the Liberal Democrats. Former Conservative MP Anna Soubry was appointed as the new Change UK leader, and one of her first official acts was to change the party name, again, this time to the Independent Group for Change. This followed a long-running dispute with the petition website change.org, which had been complaining for months that the name Change UK had hijacked its identity. With a new name came a new logo, except someone forgot to justify the margin when they typed this out. When a general election was called in December 2019, 2 of the 5 remaining Change UK MPs decided not to even stand again. Of the 3 who did run, none finished in the top 2 in their races, and none even got to double digits in their vote percentages. The former Change UK MPs who had left for other parties or stood as independents fared no better, including those who had joined the Liberal Democrats. It was a complete wipeout, and without MPs or a grassroots, Change UK was finished in all but name. Being finished in name took another week. On December 17th, Change UK was formally deregistered as a party. So now, here's the big question. Could Change UK have avoided its mistakes? Was there ever a chance to carve out a space for a centrist, pragmatic, pro-European party, or was the entire effort doomed to failure from the beginning? I'm not actually sure Change UK could ever have succeeded. Yes, the many issues with branding, like the series of terrible names and logos, should have been avoided. But the event which really killed the party, the local elections, was going to happen in early May no matter what. There was no way a new party could prevent the Liberal Democrats from surging to prominence again after that. The only way I think Change UK could possibly have succeeded is if they had launched a year earlier and used the time to build a base of supporters and thrash out a coherent set of policies. Even then it would have been difficult, but it would have been maybe just possible. But to be fair, the conditions which prompted the initial 7 MPs to quit Labour in the first place were still building a year before February 2019. Yes, things in the Labour Party were bad, or at least contentious. And yes, some of the founders of Change UK began talking about leaving Labour at about this time. But Jeremy Corbyn's stock was still riding relatively high, following a better than expected showing for Labour in the 2017 elections. So in hindsight, Change UK was always doomed to fail, which is a bit sad, I guess. What can I say? I just missed that Microsoft Word bus. Thanks for watching. If you're still watching, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this with a friend. I've got more videos to come and would love to have your support.